Hi, how are you doing? I'm recording this video in the fall of 2020. In this season, this is a preview of the lessons that we're going to be doing the week of October, I don't know, what's the next week's date? October 19th. And it's a preview of what we're doing that week, starting a brand new unit on violence. In subsequent years, we're probably going to do this. The term would be asynchronously, but independently on your own as like a homework assignment prior to coming into the class. Because typically what happens when I do this unit is we do a lot of things with class discussion and videos. And we don't really spend a lot of time on core content. That's things that you should know already. But for this week this year being the virtual world, we're going to be spending time this first week on core content things. These topics for this video and this week are typically things you should have learned in middle school. I will be going sort of fast with this, so I encourage you, if you're following along and you are absent, or if you're looking at this in the future, to pause, to be able to take notes and be able to understand the concepts that it is that I'm talking about. That said, let's go. Also, I forgot to say, I want to say thank you to one of my students, Tiva. She sent me this picture of Ha Long Bay, I think it's called. I probably am pronouncing it wrong. It's in Vietnam, and Ha Long Bay, Halong Bay. It's in Vietnam, and my students that are in my advisory send me virtual pictures to have from my virtual Zoom background. So this one is from her. So thank you so much for doing that. Without further ado, let's go and check out what the website looks like. And the website unit, in case you don't know where to go, I'm going to kind of not really go there, but I'm going to show you the address on the screen. It's karabihealthpe.com. So if you do this, I'll put it in the URL. So it's www.karabihealthpe.com, and then click on health or use the navigation bar at the top of the screen, health, and then we're talking about the violence and violence prevention unit. So you click on that, it goes right to that particular page. For the unit topics, this year we're focusing this first week on core content that's on this page that, technically speaking, is part of the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade curriculum and a 9th grade curriculum for high school. But since our school doesn't give health until 11th grade, we're kind of reviewing it in the virtual world together, as opposed to just rushing through it and making you do it independently on your own. So subsequent classes, so like 2021, 2022 school year, you may be watching this video as an assignment to do on your own prior to starting this unit in school. For this year, 2020, next week, we're going to go and talk about bullying and cyberbullying. Again, we typically watch a lot of videos and movies to go with this. We're going to watch some of them this year in the virtual environment, but not all of them. Sexual violence and abuse, we're not going to work on in this unit at all. We'll save that to sexual health, and we're probably going to be in school, at least hybrid, when we start that topic in January or February. Dating and domestic violence, we're going to save until we talk about healthy and unhealthy relationships. So we're not doing that this year in this particular unit. We're going to spend a day on gun violence in America, but you will also have the choice of a project as part of the current projects that are due for our current units. And then LGBT plus bullying and violence, we're going to see one, possibly two videos having to do with that. One will be in class, about 10 minutes, and then one is about 45 minutes. We're going to do a optional evening viewing party concerning that particular one. So we'll work on those. You may also want to look at concepts on the core concept wellness pages of conflict resolution and communication, because a lot about violence it starts off with conflict resolution. More about that momentarily. And you also would like to, you may want to go and look at self-harm and self-injury. Why? Well, let's go down and scroll down and see what the definition is of violence. According to the World Health Organization, well, that was way too big. According to the World Health Organization, World Health Association, it's supposed to be World Health Organization, I need to fix that. Violence is the intentional use of physical force or power, threatened or actual, against oneself, another person, or against a group or community that either results in or has a high likelihood of resulting in injury, death, psychological harm, maldevelopment, or deprivation. And that's the World Health Organization. And this graphic here breaks down one of the many types of violence. And what do I mean by that? If you clicked on this link, which we're not going to really look at on this video, but here's what happens when you click it. It further breaks it down into some other categories. And the first category is acts of self-directed violence, which would include self-injury and self-harm, which is why I said you may want to go to that page again. Obviously don't if it's a trigger or if you're too sensitive to that. Number two is collective violence. That's how the World Health Organization defines it, but it's basically violence between two groups. The examples that they give are wars, gang fights. At times it's opposing sides of non-peaceful protests. Interestingly enough, they made that definition prior to 2020 with the way that things have been going lately. But it could be that. Excuse me. Sorry. Although, there's debate on whether or not those have all been peaceful protests or not. For the most part, most of them have been peaceful, but the news, of course, is going to report on the ones that are not so peaceful. So that's collective violence. But then there's interpersonal violence, and that's what you're probably thinking about. It's the most common type. It's between two people or more, but it's usually a victim and it's usually an aggressor, right? It can be further broken down into this graphic right here. So making this graphic bigger for our viewing pleasure. Interpersonal violence can be community violence. That can be with an acquaintance, or it can be with a stranger, or it can be a family partner violence. So we could change that word, and we do in America, to domestic violence. Oftentimes we refer to it in dating violence, but it's not just dating violence. It's also violence within the family, and it can also be violence between two friends. I'm doing this in one take because just as if I was teaching you normally, so it's more live and more real. But in any case, with family and partner violence, it could be a child, which we're pretty much not going to talk about for the most part in health class. That's about child abuse. You may touch upon it in the sexual health unit. Partner, so that would be dating violence, domestic violence, two significant others you're talking about like that. Elder abuse. What's not on here is just violence between friends. So sometimes you are friends and things get out of hand and you have a heated argument, which would include verbal violence, or maybe sometimes you come to blows and it's physical violence, but that's not on here because the idea that the World Health Organization is that you're truly friends, then the violence is not going to be there. But obviously we know if you're talking about family and partner violence, then it could be an issue. Notice these categories on the left-hand side. Those are the World Health Organization, and the CDC also uses these 4 categories nowadays. But I tend to use, on our website, I use the categories that are included when you're speaking about the dating violence and domestic violence. So and those are physical, verbal, emotional, sexual, and dating or domestic. So a more simple definition that I found in a textbook a few years ago that I was just doing my own research for, and frankly, I don't know who the publishers were of the textbook. So if it was you and you see this video accidentally, put a comment in the stream. I'm sorry about that. But the definition that they gave was an act of aggression or intentional harm. It is usually done to another person, group, or object, most notably the destruction of someone's private property. So that's in terms of object. It also includes acts of self-injury. So that was pretty similar, but still translated different than the World Health Organization and CDC's definition. And it can be basically summed up as what I said to you when we were talking about negative expressions of emotions and feelings. Hurting someone else, hurting something else, or hurting oneself. And that's basically what we talked about when you were talking about not being able to control your emotions, negative expressions of anger, negative expressions of frustration or guilt or sadness. It's hurting someone else, something else, or oneself. A typical example that I like to give when we talk about anger is if you're really, really mad and you go and you punch the wall. Like everybody knows somebody that's done that. It's stupid. Nobody thinks when they're doing it. If it's a drywall or sheetrock, you put a hole in the wall. If it's a brick wall, you just broke your hand, or at least part of your hand, or you could have. So there's a primary example, like that's a negative expression of anger, and that's violent. it's not violent where you hurt anybody, but it hurt something else. If you look at only the World Health Organization's definition, there's not really anything about breaking stuff. All right, so moving right along, different categories of violence. I'm going to go and make this, click on it to be able to make it a different category. And if you look, then what you're seeing is the top of it is going to stay still. And let's see if I can make this bigger. Make it bigger for you. All right, cool. So the top of it is going to kind of stay there. And then I'm going to, that's too big. And I'm going to go and make it so that when I scroll, you see different parts of the physical, verbal, emotional, sexual, and dating and domestic violence. So physical violence is any act of, and again, pause this because I'm going fast if you want to take notes. This is asynchronous or independent every year, but 2020. In school, we're going to go a little bit slower on this, but again, you can find it on the website or on this video if you need to take notes. So physical, it's any act of violence where one person or group attempts to harm the body of another person or a group. You can technically put damage to private property on physical violence as well. Examples include punching, hitting, slapping, kicking, etc., etc. Some people include drug abuse as physical violence. That would be a form of self-harm if you're addicted to drugs. We already know that self-harm can also be considered physical violence to oneself. And so that's all things that are hurting the body, right? Easy, simple, to the point. Verbal violence, easy, simple, to the point, words that hurt, okay? Words that hurt. They're intentional, usually. They're used to make someone else feel bad. Because if I say something and it hurts your feelings, I wasn't necessarily being violent if you were hurt. If I knew what I was saying and I purposely hurt you, now it's an act of violence. It doesn't mean that you're hurt any less. It just means that my intent was not there. So now that is a big part of violence. Violence is usually intentional. Sometimes we can argue about crimes of passion or impulse where we're not thinking, and that's true. There's the same consequences, but for the most part, like when you look back, you might not have been able to control yourself at that moment, but you were doing it. You were doing that with the intent to hurt somebody else or something else. So keep that in mind. Typing words such as social media or text messages and acts of cyberbullying are technically sometimes included in verbal violence, but once I add the word bullying to it, it moves on to another category. And we need to keep all those things in mind. Now, those are the two biggies. Emotional, sexual, and dating or domestic violence, they're more complicated. Going backwards, dating or domestic violence, we already said it's with a partner. We don't need to define them so much today because we're going to define that in the later class in detail. You can go and look at the chart if you'd like to on my website by going to the web address that I put in the beginning, and it's also in the comments. But you can have physical, verbal, emotional, or sexual violence when it comes to dating or domestic violence. Any of those four categories can fall into dating or domestic violence. With sexual violence, it can be physical, verbal, or emotional, and it can be sexual. So sexual violence is usually specifically a sexual nature, but when you scroll down a little bit further, like sexual harassment would be verbal. Sexual assault would be physical. Obviously, if you go a little bit more extreme, such as rape, then it's sexual abuse, obviously, completely. And it falls right in that category only. And it obviously has emotional issues too that go along with it. So sexual can be all three, physical, verbal, and emotional. Dating violence can be all four, physical, verbal, emotional, and sexual. But when we look at emotional violence, what it comes down to is it's deep, it's scarring, it's intentional acts, it causes long-term emotional change. And emotional violence may have acts of physical or verbal violence associated, like I said, and it's sometimes combined, like the World Health Organization's definition and the CDC, they call it psychological violence. They combine verbal and emotional together into one category. So for them, it would be physical, psychological, sexual, dating, or domestic. And that would be the case with that. There's a link down here if you go to the chart with some more intimate details about this. And I just wanted to let you know that was available for you. All right, Only a couple more things for this summary video. On the first day of class from 2020, you're going to go through all of the things I just did, and you're also going to look at statistics. So if you are not in class and you want to do that on your own, you need to scroll down, you need to click on the Youth Risk Behavior Surveillance Report. It says 2017. It should automatically take you to 2019, Philadelphia, and review the parts about intentional violence. We're going to look at that too. We're also going to look at trends of the data from 1991 to 2019. And we're also going to look at different demographics as well to see who was felt unsafe to go to school in some cases, who was bullied in and out of school, how many fights actually were reported, things like that. We're going to look at that particular data. We're going to do an activity called the Band-Aid activity. In 2020, you're going to see a really short video that my son helped me create to do that. And then I'm going to ask you a few questions to think about for the next day. And that's what we're going to do. On the second day of class, what we're basically going to do is you're going to make a Padlet. We're going to be looking for positive messages, quotes, and images having to do with violence. And technically, I guess it would be stopping violence and stopping the hate. And then I'm going to ask you some questions like, one, what is your responsibility in stopping violence? What are specific things you can do to take responsibility for to stop, slow down, or prevent violence? If you're watching this video and you're not in class, or you're watching this video to preview class, we're going to give you a couple easy answers right now. One of them is control your emotions, to not have outbursts, so that's the case. It's to watch what you say so that you are careful with the words that you use. Excuse me. Using language that's more inclusive and not hateful, so avoiding racist or sexist or homophobic language when you're speaking to people. And it doesn't even matter what your viewpoints, beliefs are. I'm not saying like, you have to be able to agree with everything everybody says or does. And I don't even care if you personally are racist. I care about how you treat people. And I know that sounds weird on a video. I'm telling you, I don't care if you're racist. I mean, obviously I care if racism exists and people are racist, but I care more about how you speak to people, how you treat people, and are you going to commit acts of violence towards them? So one of the things you can do is watch your words and be careful of what you're saying so that you're not intentionally hurting somebody, and be educated when you do say things that are hurtful. Some other things are don't lash out. Some other things are try to avoid fights when they happen. Along with that, unfortunately, violence is all around us, and we're not going to be able to make it so that you can always stay away from violence. So you're also going to see on day 2 of this lesson, this slideshow, which today we're going super fast on, and you can pause it to be able to take notes. I will say it a little bit slower in class, but there's specific things that you can do to try to limit when you are a target of violence or not, to try to limit when you are the victim of violence. So if you have any questions about any of these, please reach out to be able to talk via email. And I'm sure you have some good other answers as well. If you're not in my class, you can put a message in the chat. I mentioned again about the following week, going to have information on bullying topic page, cyberbullying, dating violence, not yet, but coming up within the next several weeks. So these are all things that also be aware of as they're coming. And I just want to put some other questions into your head, along with the things that I've said so far. So far, I've said, what is your responsibility for preventing violence? I also said, what is your, what are things that you can do to protect yourself from violence? Think about, for other classes, why do people resort to violence? On day 3 of this, we're going to look at why people resort to violence and really examine that. And then on day 4 of this, the 4th day of this in class, typically we do this particular lesson in the gym, but I'm going to show you some answers on that day on the board. When I have a video, you'll be able to click on that video at the end of this one eventually. I'm going to talk to you about what true self-defense is, how to stop yourself from getting into a fight when you're about to, oftentimes, and how to protect yourself in true acts of self-defense if that's called for. So that's going to be coming from a separate video, and I'll tell you where I learned that information in a moment. The only other thing that I want to say, and I thank you all for being so patient, this is a kind of longer video, but I pretty much summed up not only an entire class worth of things, but an entire week worth of class in this video without getting specifics. The only other thing that I want to mention to you as I share my screen one more time is that we have another web page, like I said, that was part of our core concepts pages. We don't really get into it too much. I do show it, and it's the conflict resolution page. And one thing about violence is with conflicts, all violence that's interpersonal is a me versus you conflict. It's an external conflict. And if you're the causer, if you're the person that's the aggressor, it might be because there's an internal conflict within you and you're lashing out like that. But if you're the victim, more than likely it's because you are the victim. You being the victim is because it's an external conflict. And a lot of it with conflicts is this little cycle right here. You create beliefs and then that creates a conflict and then you have a response and then you cause consequences. Well, when you get into violence, sometimes it's because you think that violence is the right answer. Other times it's because there's something more deeper going on inside of you, an emotional issue or a sense of self or something like that, which we'll get into in future classes. But I do want to scroll down and let you see the part about resolution and the rules for fighting fair. And one of the things that we really have to understand is when you are in an argument, it doesn't necessarily need to be violence. One of the other questions that I'm going to ask this week is what is the difference between aggression and violence? And aggression isn't necessarily bad. In some cases, you actually call for it, like in competing in certain sports and games and things. Aggression is not necessarily bad, but violence is hurtful. So we don't want to be hurt. We don't want to be violent, but it doesn't matter about being aggressive. So the one thing you want to say about principles of problem solving is doing all of these things, pause it to be able to copy the notes. But the most important is attack the problem, not the person. If you have an issue and you want to be able to deal with it, then you attack the problem, not the person. What's the root of the issue? What is the conflict? What is the thing that's going on? And that's what you want to do, not come at the person that way, because coming at the person is violent most of the time. That said, with all due respect, we're going to sign off right now, and I hope that you have a great rest of your day. Email me with any questions. Bye-bye.